All right. Hey everyone, I'm Vaibhav. This is Dexter.
Hi,
Um, I work on BAML and I make programming language. Dexter?
I'm Dex. I'm the founder of Human Layer, and I make tools to make agentic coding easier and better. And this is the AI That Works show, where we give you about an hour a week of practical coding tips for advanced usage and to improve your use of AI.
Exactly. Um, and then our whole goal here is always, sorry, one second. Uh, I apologize for that. I'm working from home today because the internet at our office is dead. So sadly, I was stuck here and our cleaners were around. So I was like, let me go tell them not to do the top floor. But one of the things that Dexter and I was talking about is context engineering. We talk about how to go build these systems. And I think a lot of people forget that all these AI applications that we are all building, whether we're the user or the engineer building them, every single one of us has to think about context engineering along that loop. You have to, as the user of an application, you have to be like, how can I context engineer Claude the best to make it generate the code I want? As a builder of Claude code, I need to go ahead and think about how can I make it so that the agent will do what the user wants more of the time. And that it's that symbiosis of both systems that it actually makes a really beautiful experience that makes us be like, wow, and blows our minds away and says these AI agents are actually really good. And well, normally a lot of our past episodes have been talking about how do we actually write some of these agents. Today, I think there's some real magic in really thinking about how we're going to go ahead and almost be the users and think about how can we, as users, do our best efforts to go and make these agents do the way that make them work the way that we really want them to work. And one really interesting insight that I have personally learned working with Dex on these kinds of things, and I've been learning from him a lot actually on these topics, really
Sorry.
comes down to the fact of like I actually become a better agent builder by becoming a better agent user. Because it helps me think about like what are the UX patterns that I wish existed in these apps? What are the mistakes that the agent is making, and how do I actually want to interface with them? For example, last week's episode was about how to build agents that you can interrupt. Why does that matter? Well, the most frustrating thing is when I'm in ChatGPT and I tell it to do something and it starts spitting out text, and halfway through I'm like, no, 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 go in that direction. And what I have to do there is I have to hit cancel, edit my previous message, and then press enter. I wish I could just send a message. And there's small things like that that help us think about the design patterns that we need to do when we build these agents. And so today we're going to do something really exciting, which is be users of Claude Code. Dex, you want to take it away?
I would love to. Yeah. So yeah, I think just kind of hammering that down a little bit, like one of the things we say a lot in context engineering is LLMs are stateless functions, right? So you have your LLM, like the LLM outputs some kind of tokens, and that's like, you have your answer. And this answer has a spectrum of quality from like, you know, it's slop to, hey, that's really, really good. And the only thing that kind of affects the quality of this answer, if you're using a fixed LLM and kind of fixed parameters, is the quality of the tokens you put in. And the tokens you put in is essentially going to be a context window, right? You can think people talk about prompt engineering and a prompt, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a bunch of different components of what you put in. You're going to have your system message. You're going to have some, maybe if you did some RAG or injected stuff, you may like pull some data from somewhere else. You're going to have actually, if you're building an AI application, right, then you may pull in the user message, and then you may put in some like, instructions, and then you may also put in some like memories, right? There's all kinds of stuff you could put in this context window, and you can shuffle. We've done a lot of episodes on like shuffling the order of these things and figuring out how to make them more concise and more optimized for the LLM. And so that's if you're writing the code and you're just structuring everything around this LLM call, then you have a lot of levers you can pull to improve the performance of this answer that your system gets or that your user gets. But today we're going to talk, and 2 weeks ago we talked about like just if you are not the agent builder and you're just the agent user, and the only thing you control is the user message, why it's so important to understand, actually, we'll change this to tools because that's more relevant. Why it's so important to understand the other parts of the prompt and where your message gets injected. Because at the end of the day, you're just one step removed, but you're still doing context engineering. You just have less control. The agent builder owns these parts, and you only own your user message. Does that make sense?
Exactly. And like one important thing to think about as an agent builder here is while we all aspire to almost hide all these parts purely from our users and hope that they're purely implementation details, in practice, you actually make it harder for the users of your app to go do something better when you make it totally abstracted. It's important. I would say it's almost your obligation as an agent builder to at least have provide some insight to your users about how things work. It's kind of like if you ever use like any sort of like social media, there's some feedback loop that you get from like Twitter or LinkedIn about like what content is doing well, and you're able to navigate that yourself. Even if you don't know exactly what's going on, there's some feedback loop that's available to you that you can iterate. Some people become amazing content creators because they learn how to grasp that signal way better than other people do. Same thing here. But if you're building a tool and you make it too hard for most users to understand how to min-max your tool, they're just not going to use it because it'll end up more on the slop side than the really good side.
Yeah, and there's a spectrum there, right? Like some users, sometimes you want to make an AI for users that are not very sophisticated and don't understand that tool calls are just JSON objects that get injected in with a schema and things like that. And then in that case, it's like if you're building like an AI for people to get, you know, let's say medical advice, an AI veterinarian that's going to help people like figure out what's going on with their pets. It's like unlikely those people are very thoughtful context engineers. Some of them maybe, but then when you're building a coding agent that's going to be used by really technical people, then this becomes a lot more important.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Two quick like kind of throwbacks. I think it's here. Yeah, so we did this episode about Claude Code and using like kind of like context engineering and applying it to how you use coding agents. We're not actually going to talk much about that today, although some of the same concepts are going to be in there. A thing we get asked about a lot, and a thing that I've been doing a lot and really enjoying that I thought I would share some experiences on is how to use Claude Code to do things that are not writing code, because it's actually just a very good general purpose agent. And the fact that it can write code is really interesting because instead of having to find MCP tools for everything, Claude can kind of just write its own scripts. So I'm going to walk through a couple concepts that I think are really important to understand here, and then we'll demo. I have a demo set of code in the repo about kind of how we use this. And Andrew, yes, the Claude Code System prompt is all about code, but it still works pretty well for other things as well. Oops. Um, so this is, I've set up a
Yeah, there's a
little,
Brian. While you pull that up, Dex, Brian, that's a
yeah, go
really
ahead.
good question. Isn't there a spectrum of like novice users to power users? There completely is, but that's kind of why it's important for you as an agent builder to think really carefully about what that spectrum is for your users and where they fall on. If your users fall more towards the novice side, like they're not going to go do it. It's not just about exposing user messages. It's actually about building really interesting UI paradigms so that a thing that is typically viewed as a user message is actually going to be have like some additional metadata. For example, let's say you're building a RAG system that's going to go answer questions about it. Can I draw on your screen text?
Go for it. Oh, let me share the links so you can actually draw on the whiteboard itself.
That would actually be much better. Um, and then we'll go back to this really fast. And then Amo, yes, all the recordings are shared. If you've signed up on the Luma link, you will get an email automatically at the end of either tomorrow or by the end of this week at the latest.
And they are also all here in the repo. If you go to the AI that works repo, there is an index of all of the past episodes. So if you want to go binge them, please go do that and have fun.
So just to be really concrete, really first on this, like one way to build a search box is to just say search box, and now I'll magically do RAG under the hood. Another way to build a search box is just to say like, here's a RAG I'm pulling from under the hood, and I will actually, like what Cursor does, you can use the @ symbol to refer to other documents. And whether it's a Word doc or something else or Google Docs, doesn't really matter. but it allows the user to have some UX that basically intervenes into the context building without even feeling like it's intervening into the context building. And you can do this with tools, you can do this with RAG, you can do this with almost anything. And
Yeah,
it doesn't even have to be pure green. It could be half user,
right. You have
half
the blend, right?
exactly. You could have a blend. But this is kind of where you can think about how you like how easy and hard something feels is purely based on the amount of developer experience that you are willing to impose on your end users based on the amount of engineering work you're willing to do. If you're willing to do more engineering work, you can basically give your users full control of everything. If you're really good at UX, it won't even feel bad. If you're really bad at UX, you'll basically make them reinvent context engineering from scratch. And then you better hope your users are extremely, extremely technical.
Yeah, I love it. Great. So one thing that we've been doing is essentially we've created a Git repo that we use to do all of our non-technical things. And so I'll walk through kind of one example, which is a CRM. We don't use a CRM anymore. Claude Code runs our CRM. And while you could have Claude Code have an MCP tool that talks to Salesforce or Linear or Airtable or whatever you're using for your CRM, we've actually just found this works really well with Markdown documents. And so I'll push all this code. I haven't pushed it yet, but we have kind of a core structure of a fictional company that is a on-demand burrito delivery platform. I also have a couple of real examples from our internal stuff that I will not be sharing, but I will show them to you here. So I've cleaned this up a little bit, but this is, let's just delete this folder just in case there's still stuff in it. This is like reveals another company in our YC batch. They do really cool stuff. But you'll see a couple things here is like this is a markdown document that explains the people we're talking to and what's happened so far. We also have contacts for all of these people. And then we have events. So like this is an event of, and so like these are all things that you could imagine being SQL objects in a database. But what's been working really well is like if you keep them as markdown, then there's no tool calls required other than just reading and writing files. And what you have is you start to build out basically rather than like a relationship graph that you would use with a SQL database, we're kind of faking it with building a knowledge graph as markdown files that kind of just point to each other. And it's a lot more free form and it's a lot more structureless. But that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of, and like Claude can rewrite any of this stuff. You can fire off a bat. If you decide you don't like the structure, you can do something else. But it's basically the combination of like front matter for deterministic things. So you could feed this part to code and it's metadata about the document, and then Claude can read the document and the front matter, but like read the document and understand how it's going.
And I wanna call out a couple things really fast. The reason that this works now and it didn't used to work before is because the models are getting better. So, and this is just an emergent capability that we'll all discover over time of exactly what's going on. But if you go ahead and assume that the model can never do something, you won't be able to push it to the limit of what it's actually able to do.
Yeah. And this isn't perfect yet. And it's not just the models too. I would say it's also the agents themselves.
Yes.
And so here's our engagement history, right? So, and I'll show you how this data gets in, but it's not just the models themselves, it's like the agent harness, right? Claude Code is not just Claude's a great model and it's really, really well trained and tuned for doing this kind of work, but it's also that the harness around it is really, really tailored to modifying files in a repo. Um, and so, oh, we got a lot of notes in the chat. Tyler, so this is a great question. So it's like, would this scale over thousands of contacts? And so the way that we scale this across thousands of contacts is basically by doing deterministic context packing, basically. And so what we have in here is we have a make file that essentially is ways to kind of deterministically build up your context. And so rather than having the agent go, this one's very specific to like, hey, let's just show the first 100 lines of a couple different files. Oh God. Sorry, I was doing some last minute prep here. So excuse my insane cursor stuff. And I know I said I don't really use editors anymore, but I do use cursor when I'm in a hurry and I procrastinated on the episode prep. So here's the one that we had for human layer, basically, which is, our company, everything we have, our README, our biweekly meeting notes, our weekly updates, our monthly investor updates, and just kind of passing in certain bits of context. And so you can imagine doing this similarly with a file that basically traverses this knowledge graph or slices and dices by tags and things like this. And so we build tools for this. Let's see. I actually don't have one right now. But let's see if we can make one.
Do you want to show the full measures.ts?
Yeah, so this is another like so the other part of this is SOPs. So you have sort of like markdown as database, and you have kind of two sections, right? You have your front matter index/deterministic. And then you have your actual document, which is like mostly for models. So that's
and when Dexter
yeah.
says the word front matter, can you pull up the code really fast, Dex, the
Yeah.
markdown files? I want to be a little bit more explicit about what he means by this. Front matter is this part.
Is so markdown docs support this format.
Yeah, and what you can think of this as is we all know if you ever have seen Claude code, and this is just intuitive knowledge that Dexter is using based on how he has seen Claude code work. It might change if Claude code does something different. But Claude code, what it does when you first refers to a file that's really long, is it actually just dumps out the first 100 or 100 lines or so of it. Just see what it does approximately.
Yeah.
What that means is if you're an engineer and you're not writing doc strings at the top of a file explaining what it does, you're just hurting your ability for super long files to be super useful. Similarly, in markdown files, can you go back?
Yep.
In markdown files, Dexter's doing the same thing by saying like, hey, if I want to deal with Aman, what is the with Anum? The most important thing that I have to deal with is I really want to know like recent information that is super important for me to know. I probably want to have context info and everything else on there, and I probably want to know like any relevant files that I might want to look into in case I want to have like quick jumps. And what that does for the model is any agent that's using this has really quick interaction of like, is this relevant? Is this not relevant? And you can make a decision for that without having to go ahead and actually, without having to go ahead and actually like read the entire file. What that means is if we go back to how context engineering works, the best thing you can do in forms of context engineering, whether as a user or as a developer, is give the answer to the model, and that's it. If you give it the exact answer you want to spit out, it will spit it out for you. The second best thing you can do is give it as much data that is related to the actual answer without having to actually think about it. However, that is also really hard. So the next best thing you can do is give it as little noise about what isn't relevant so that it can actually do the right thing. So in this scenario, by only pruning it to the most relevant sections at the top, Dexter can effectively give the model the least amount of noise, and the noise being all the other noise in every single file, without having to think about it. So
yes,
there you go. They're muted.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I muted them. This is in get ignore, so Claude can't find it. But what we have, I will show you. There's a couple fun things you can do. So like I want to talk about kind of like deterministic context packing. And this is like a really, really
spend $2 just to run a make command?
Is it $2? Where does it say $2?
Or like at least $1 because you're running Opus.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We use Opus for everything. So yeah, this thing is going to, okay, there's a typo. So anyways, you can use Claude to build out these systems, and you can tell Claude like, hey, I want a script. Let's make another one. I need a script that only fetches files modified the last day. Read some files for examples and put it in a TS file I can run with fun in tools. So you can start to build out kind of programmatic ways to work with this information and then hand those tools back to Claude. And one of the things we do a lot is we use slash commands to kind of automate some of this stuff. So this is like, and run the daily review SOP. So we have things called SOPs, and this is what I spend most of my time doing is like, okay, you're working in a company. What are all the things you're doing manually? Okay, I check my email and I do this. Okay, I got to go check this thing once a week. Okay, I got to pull these metrics. And so you can start building these into SOPs. This is kind of a redacted version of what we use a human layer. So every day there's kind of like, hey, you're going to output a comprehensive markdown file. This is actually related also to how we do compaction. So I turn this on every morning and I just brain dump into it everything that's going on. I read my calendar, I read a couple other things. The one we use also has a bunch of tools to like check email and check calendar and stuff like that, which I haven't included yet, but you can imagine how those would fit. But we say, do a brain dump, do a metrics review. So let me see if I can actually kick this off. Let's see how this goes. I haven't tested this, but we have another one for our investor updates. So I have fake investor updates for the Burrito Now monthly. And so the idea would be every day you log in or every couple days you log in and you generate a daily review. And then once a month, I just compact all the daily reviews and then have some tools to do things like pull metrics or pull PR links or pull product updates from other systems and compact them into a really nice investor update. And you can write basically the SOPs become your prompts and your commands. And then
So,
yeah.
so one really tangible example for everyone here, because I know a lot of people are engineers, are all of us probably execute some team that does some stupid amount of stand-up. And most stand-ups, while stand-up is a great ritual to actually have a forcing function for everyone to connect, the actual content of the update is um, is actually very hard and very useless for a lot of people to have. So what we can do is you could imagine running a stand-up where instead of actually having everyone go do it, you just look at the PRs that happen, look at all the Git commissions, expect everyone to just like regularly be pushing featured incomplete branches, and just run a system that's going to Git clone every single branch that everyone is actively working on and pushed in the last 2 days. Get a summary of it, get the person, get the system, and then just write it down. And then boom, you now have stand-up updates for free, backed by sources of truth. And you can actually make sure stand-up is under 5 minutes, guaranteed.
Yep.
It's a
And
really
so like this,
tangible thing that you can do. But this requires you, as whoever's running this, to actually have access to the GitHub repos and be able to write some amount of knowledge about how it's going to work, but it doesn't really have to be that good. Claude Code can
so
really figure out the rest.
yeah. So usually I would come in here and do like a big long rambling brain dump of like, okay, I had these meetings yesterday and we got these new clients signed and I need to follow up with these 6 people because and it's just like brain dump what's on your mind. And then you would paste that in here. So in this case, I'm not going to send that. I'm just going to say, hey, we sold a lot of burritos yesterday. And then it's going to go through and run through this SOP. So it's going to review yesterday's work, which like in our repo, we have a journal file. So the model kind of tracks. It's like all these different ways of doing memory. And right now I'm like kind of in prototype mode. And so there's a lot of duplicated data. And then as we refine the process and figure out what works, we're getting more and more concise. Like the CRM stuff is actually pretty baked and concise, but some of the more like journaling and memory and like update stuff we're still figuring out how we want that to all work.
Tyler asks a really interesting question. How do you think about agents versus workflows when automating these non-coding tasks? I think my perspective on all this is like, I think the word agent or workflow doesn't really matter. What I always think about is just like, how much automation are you actually getting and how clean is the result that you need? If you need it to be perfect, then like write the code. Just write a tool that pulls the data that you want and then have Claude Code format into human readable format. If you're okay with loosey-goosey stuff like stand-up updates, honestly, I would just tell Claude Code to git clone every single git clone the repos, look at all the branches that are modified in the last 48 hours, give a summary of every single diff against the main branch. And I don't need it to be perfect, and I would just tell it to go do that. And I'd say use sub agents for every single branch.
So we actually do this because I'm not exactly sure what the workflow is, and I'm a little less like concerned about like exactly what happens here. We built this release notes SOP as a prompt, not as a workflow. But you could easily see how you could be like, okay, fetch the last things with an API call, and then grab the body of each one, and then send that to an LLM to format into an update. Where it's like, okay, use a BAML call to extract 2 sentences about the release and then extract each feature, and then like the deterministic code builds the markdown file. And we may actually do that someday, but what this becomes is a really nice way to do prototyping. And so this thing, like now that I have this workflow, I'm changing it every day, and I can just change the prompt and I get the results that I want. Because the stuff that is like deterministic, which is like using the GHCLI, is pretty straightforward, and Claude is really good at doing these kinds of things. If I have Claude write a tool to check my email, that's pretty easy for it to like run and then change the kind of like how the workflow is supposed to work. And I'll show you actually the trace of one of these conversations that we had. But I use this every morning to go fetch the PRs we merged last night and write release notes for the latest nightly build. And so we'll come back to this daily review one, but I'm going to show you the, let's see, is there release notes? I think I archived it. Oh, here we go. This is it. So this is our release notes from this morning. So it ran our print context, which is showing the company identity and some of the other examples, and how to get help from humans and like the people on the team and all this stuff. And then it does a make print index. So this is like, this is the context packing thing, right? Rather than having it go like agentically search or use the built-in LS tool, I know that I'll get more like context efficiency by just having it look at every single like markdown file. And as this gets really, really big, I will probably have it only look at recent projects and stuff. But the nice thing is like this becomes really easy to tune. And because it's so interactive and human in the loop, you can kind of just keep updating it every day as you go.
Yeah.
But what this did was it listed out the PRs and saw the merged PRs that we had from last night. It did the JSON body stuff. So like this is all stuff that could be programming and scripting, but it's all meta work. It's all things that are like tedious back office things that I would usually just spend time going and compiling release notes every day. And like, yes, there are tools that will do this for you, but they're kind of hard to customize. But what can customize text really, really well is like a prompt and an LLM. And so this went through and it edited the release and it created this release tag for code layer last night. And here's what it looks like. So I literally did this morning. And then when it was done, I went and made a video demoing it. And then it even made me a like Slack. We have a couple like Slack channels, private channels of like our kind of, I call it trusted testers. I think some of y'all are in here. But then it just made the announcement post. So I've given it the format in the SOP of how to do this and all of the steps, including like, hey, when you're done, like prompt me and I will give you a video demo. And then you go put that in the release notes.
Yeah. I think the mental model that I have found worked really well here is, can you go back to the whiteboard?
Yeah.
This is at least the mental model that I use. Where did it go? It hid it from me.
You're here.
Sorry, I'm pulling it up again. Yep. The mental model that I have found worked really, really well. I'm gonna be at the bottom next.
Yeah,
I think we're entering like an kind of I think Karpathy said this really interestingly, which was like you have software and then you have like software 1.0, which is like pure code. And then you have like traditional machine learning, which is all about like writing actual training models, collecting data, all that stuff. And like now we have this like new box that somehow like sits in the middle of this stuff. That was like LLM stuff is kind of what I would put it as. And now all of a sudden, a lot of the random stuff that we used to do, how do I get rid of the arrow? I don't know how to get rid of the arrow. Okay, well, I'll figure that out later. A lot of the stuff that we used to do with like pure code can now just be done by an LLM. The only caveat is that some of the stuff that now happens in this box is just going to break some of the time. But the trade-off is while it breaks some of the time, it also can be a lot more flexible and adaptable. So when you think about engineering, I think there's a discussion thread going on about like agents versus workflows, all this other stuff. I think the easiest way to think about this is it's not actually about like agents or workflows. Agents and workflows don't really matter. You can use agents as tools. You can use workflows as tools. Agents can have workflows. Workflows can have agents. It's really just the matter of like whether it's a sequence of stuff or whether you have a while loop. But what I find the easiest way to think about this is how much tolerance do I have for my software not being 100% like consistent? Generating release notes, I have a lot of tolerance. If I miss something, release note, that's okay. I probably trust if I add something that's not there, also okay, because I can go back and edit it if it's not there. And then it's really just a mental model of like how much trust can I build in the model to go and go do this. It turns out I have a lot of trust in the model to go look at a bunch of Git logs and like summarize what actually happened based on that system.
Yep.
Therefore, it becomes a great task to actually do LLM stuff in it. And I think another analogy that really breaks this down, like whether this is like coding or not coding, whether you're putting in that's coding or not, is just this analogy of like, think about how Python, we used to have Python, then we had C++, then we had C, then we used to have assembly. And even before that, we had like machine code. And if you go to the era in which each of these is invented and you ask like a C dev in like 1990s if Python is a real language, they'd say no. You have to know garbage collection and memory management to be able to write code. Turns out in 2025, that's not true. You can write a lot of good code by just writing Python. And it's very possible that the world that we live in is whatever is going to happen here is the same thing. You used to have to write Python code to be able to call yourself an engineer, and the definition of it just changes. So the thing we're doing, the Dex is showing you, may very well be exactly what engineering is 5 years from now. There's no reason that it doesn't have to be. So thinking of it as like kind of almost like an extension to what you're doing today and being like, oh, for some stuff, I have to write C. If I want to invent NumPy, even in Python, I have to write C. I might even have to write some assembly. But for most stuff, I can write Python. Similarly, the spectrum here is for coding tasks or non-coding tasks, you're really engineering, whether you call it that today or not. It's just what level of engineering are you doing?
Yeah, and it's the conversation might not be like, hey, am I going to go write C because the Python's is going to be like, okay, cool, like the LLM is not quite getting it right. I'm going to go write Python code because I need a certain level of quality or performance or accuracy for this one little part. And so for that part, we drop down out of the specifications and the words and the prompts. And it's okay, this part I'm just going to do by hand because it has to be very, very, it's super, the leverage is like super impactful. But I will say on this like workflows versus agent stuff, like what I will probably do once I get this to a satisfactory place, this workflow is I'll probably just pop open and be like, great, turn this whole workflow into a TS script in tools/releases. And basically like once you figure out like tuning exactly and you get kind of the flow you want, you can have the model bake it as a workflow and then it becomes faster, more reliable, and it just is kind of like doing I mean, who knows how it's going to use the tools to do the summary. Like I probably have to prompt it to say like, okay, use my Anthropic API key and call Anthropic for these phases. But in general, if you can figure out the workflow and then you can pinpoint which parts of this are AI driven, then you can make the deterministic parts deterministic faster. Don't spend tokens on them. Don't wait for the model to figure it out because it's the same every single time.
Can I show something related to that, Dexter?
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. So this is again inspired heavily by what Dexter does. Let me just make sure that I'm okay. I'll share my Obsidian because I can do that safely. I wasn't sure what's on my desktop right now, so I was like, let me make sure it's safe. So when you think about this stuff, for example, like one of the things that we do is we think really hard about. We've been doing a new thing where we write design docs heavily using Claude, inspired by
is
Dexter.
this your Obsidian thing?
Yeah.
I've been waiting to see this. This is sick. Okay.
So we write all our design docs now through Claude. It's very useful. And for example, one of the stuff that we're investigating right now is how is actually this is a bad design doc because this is going to have too much context for people. But I will talk about this. Cool. So one of the things that we'd love to add into BAML is discriminated unions. I would love for people to be able to write things like this, so then they can actually get like really beautiful TypeScript classes that look like this automatically, that actually have state and stuff attached to them. It's really hard to do naming for some reason. But part of doing this discriminated union stuff is sometimes at the top of every doc, I wanted to go ahead and have like links to files and everything. And this is super abstract, so I don't actually restrict it too much. But a lot more of the design docs, I have a new prompt actually that I'm using. I actually want a summary of everything in here so I can quickly find stuff about like what branch was I working on, what was the date on this, who's the person that worked on this. And I don't do something very smart here. This is actually 7 different API calls to Claude Code because it runs like 7 different commands to go assemble this. What I should be doing is I should have a script.
Make a script that gets the metadata. Yeah, we did that. So we used to have it be 4 calls to Claude Code, and then we're like, okay, this is the same every time. And actually, like the way that the bash works is that you have to pull in, like you can't whitelist it in permissions because of how the haiku call evaluates your allow policy. And so we were just like, okay, cool, we'll make a script and we'll allow list the script.
Exactly. And by doing this, you can, one, not only have your agents work faster, because now instead of waiting for 4 calls to get this happen before all this dumps out, you just do 1 call. And it just pulls out all the data and go dumps it out immediately to the file. So one, you get expediency. One, you save a lot of money. Because remember, the way that you get charged for all this stuff is by your context window. And if you're running 4 scripts with the same context window before writing the final document, 1, 2, 3, 4, your context window is being billed to you 4 times to collect this data. So if you
Well,
spent
part of it is cache, but
still being billed to you 4 times
yeah.
to build this data.
Yeah.
And the way Claude Code does the caching, from what I understand, is Claude has at most 4 caching segments built in. So at
Yeah.
best, you're getting a 4x reduction on parts of the window, but for really, really large segments, you're not getting that much.
And you're still always paying for the generation, right? The model has
Yeah.
to say bash this, bash that, bash this thing over here. And so each one of
It's
those, you're still paying for output tokens.
exactly. And this was, if you go back and look at
Oh,
the SWE
sorry.
agent, if you go back and look at the SWE, and I'm going to throw out different things, SWE agent toolchain, one of the best innovations they had was instead of giving the model super high level tools, like just bash. So for example, we could say Claude Code's only tool is just bash, and it can do everything for you bash. Problem is, the model just works better if it can just run like read file instead of having to write the bash command for reading a file. Read file with this line number instead of having to go write the bash command for reading this file with a line number or range. It just like reduces the amount of effort the model has to do, and it can think at a higher level. And it's kind of like how when you do a design doc, if in the process of writing this design doc, I have to be like, here's the exact implementation of this at the same time of designing the system, my brain can't operate in that way. So it's really useful for me to actually just write the design doc for like, what is the end user going to see? What is the end user going to interface with? And only after that, go forward and then work on the implementation plan in some way or another. But it's the idea is you can break down the problem. And similarly, when you go do non-coding tasks, you want to think about it in the same way. What are the systems of the prompt that I can do in the very beginning that are super, super verbose and repetitive and perhaps have some ambiguity to them? And then eventually I can apply an optimization function. Like if you were to optimize code, you'd make it faster and more reliable. Same thing. I can say, hey, I'm doing the same thing 4 times. This thing is very deterministic. Let's move to software 1.0 and write regular code to go solve this problem. And the rest of my system will still be software 3.0, which is more about LLM driven software.
Super dope. Should we see if our script, I have a couple other things I can show off,
Yeah.
but any questions so far? I really like Kyle's point on like Mostra is a good take on this. Agents and workflows need to be composable, right? A workflow can call agents, agents can call workflows. They're just kind of these different building blocks that can have like infinite depth if you want them to, depending on the complexity of your problem.
John asked the question of like, has this been able to keep the code base consistent, coherent, and coherent and consistent? I will not share with you what I said. I will actually share with you what one of my engineers said, because obviously I'm going to be biased in many different ways. So I will share with you general. And that's gonna, and this technique, by the way, really, really inspired by actually I'll just show you the DM. So firstly, first thing while he's been doing this is Claude Code doesn't read really large files. We have some really, really large files in our code base. His response immediately, we need to optimize for this. So he's like, we should not have large files anymore. So we'll probably add a linting rule in our code base to go solve this. Like it's just that good. And our code base is complex. We're building a compiler in Rust. It's not the easiest task for the language to go do. The model is really surprised the fact that it works. But the most important part is actually, I don't know if it's in here. We're discussing this for a while. The hardest part that it actually turns out to be is 80% of it is just using it efficiently. The whole planning phase that we do with the research phase, I was heavily, heavily inspired by Dexter, would have never thought about it. I didn't believe in Claude Code to that degree. Like it works, but I didn't think it could do hard things.
We just
Until
merged the PR today. Last
We did
Saturday,
merge.
me and Vibov sat down and I was trying to teach him this stuff. And I was like, here's the prompts, go try them for a thing. And after about 45 minutes, I think Vibov said, I don't know if this is going to work for our code base. Like, I already knew where this was. This would have taken me 15 minutes. Like, I don't think this is for us. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? He's like, Dex, how about you drive? And I was like, cool, I'll drive, but I want you to pick a really big, complex thing that we're going to work on because I want to prove to you that this works in big code bases. And we sat there for 7 hours, and we coded two features. We added WASM support to BAML, so now you can
Not
run it in
merged
the
yet.
browser.
Be very transparent. That one is not merged yet.
I know. Well, yeah, neither of them got merged that day.
No,
But
abort
today,
controllers is
the
merged.
the abortion one, the abort controller one, adding cancellation to BAML got merged. Which is like I think it was what like 35,000 lines of code, and a lot of it was generated, but it was like a crap ton of code that we wrote.
Yeah. To give you context here, this whole process that we built, this problem was a very, very hard problem. We've had 3 people on our team try and attempt it. They've spent 4 days each individually at different time periods of the BAML project. No one merged it. And there's reasons why it didn't merge or no one was able to solve it. But what's interesting is that this technique allowed us to go and build this out and get it working demo in about 7 hours, while in parallel doing some other really hard thing, which is WebAssembly support. And then we were actually able to go ahead and actually build playground support in our VS Code extension that actually allows you to cancel something while running. So not only did we add it to the core runtime, so you as a TypeScript dev can just like abort a method that's running under the hood, but you can also cancel it in WebAssembly. And this project would have just never happened if it wasn't for vibe coding. So it does work. That said, while it did produce almost the right code, it didn't produce what we call like clean code. So while once we got it working, we had to go do something, which is we had to go ahead and issue some sort of React, some sort of cleaning, I would say, along the hood, where we had to go and say like, hey, here you created some methods that don't need to exist. Use the existing methods instead, and don't extend the API interface. But that was much, much easier to do once we had a working example and it worked end to end and it actually had unit tests and testability to just change the internal mechanisms to be more along the design that we had. It's definitely 80% less work than it would have been otherwise. Like, no doubt in my mind.
Anyways, we're not here to talk about Claude for coding, but that was a great like little side tangent. What else do you think would be useful to talk about? I mean, I have more demos. We can look at this daily review thing and see if it's running. So it's like running our pull metric script, which
Yeah.
is
While this
fake.
is running, I'll take
Yeah.
a couple more questions. Slava asked, like, why not use a local database like SQL instead of MD files? Well, Slava, the question is really just the same thing that we've talked about the whole time, which is it's an optimization spectrum. The V0, the most lossy form of this data, is a markdown file. If you find that, hey, we are scaling to thousands of people, you can optimize it to use a SQL database over time. But the whole point of this is you don't have to on day one.
So
Is it running yet, Dex?
yeah, so these are some of our tools. So I showed the like make print context command, which shows, the company overview, the recent investor updates. This is how you can kind of deterministically pack your context without Claude needing to go do, again, the same thing that you mentioned about like, hey, rather than like doing this, we just do it all as a script. Same idea is like, if I know that every time this thing runs, I want it to have all this context and I don't want to put it all in Claude MD for whatever reason, because sometimes I might not, but it's like 90% of workflows, I'm going to tell it to call the like make print context, print index things. And then we actually used something called like ctx.md, which is like run, make, print, context, make, run, make, print, index, follow the user's ask. And so now I can say slash ctx, what's the last investor update? And it will get all this context automatically without having to go read a bunch of files. So if there's stuff you always want to know, and this gets back into context engineering, right? Because if you just put everything in, then you are going to take up too much of the context window and you're going to distract it and there's going to be flows and things like this. But this is kind of hopefully this technique is clear of how you could basically give the model access to, or you can kind of like streamline your workflows and just kind of guarantee that the model will always have kind of the core base context. And the reason why we don't use Claude MD for this is because what we talked about 2 weeks ago is if you look in the Claude Code system prompt, it does inject Claude MD, but it says a system instruction at the end because most people don't know how to write a good Claude MD because they're not context engineers. They're aspiring context engineers. They gotta figure out, like, learn this stuff. Is it says this may not be relevant. Only consider this advice if it's highly relevant to what you're working on. And so if you want to guarantee stuff ends up in the context window in a way that is sort of will get more attention from the model, then you can be a little bit more deterministic about how this works.
Yeah. And I think you asked an interesting question of like, how do you deal with it if you have a long running task that Claude needs to go run, and you want to take a dependency on it in a future task? Well, this really goes back to like you as a user need to understand the restrictions of the agent that you are using. Claude Code doesn't really have a way to add dependencies on background tasks. There's nothing you as a user can do to really make that work super, super reliably. Claude Code lets you run a background task, but it doesn't let you depend on that background task for some other task. So until the agent builder enables that capability, you can't do it. So sadly, that's just like understanding what the limits and stuff are. And if you really need that because your workflow is constantly like that, well, then you'll have to build your own agent loop. And that actually builds that in as a mechanism for what the system does. And the reason for that is because if you're running a background task and you want to put dependency on it, then whatever system task you're using has to have context on here's all the background tasks that I'm currently running. And therefore, here's how you go build this out under the hood.
A lot of questions about the Claude Code system prompt. We did, I think we dropped a snippet of it in the last AI that works, or the one where we talked about Claude. Oh, not that. Let's just have a look at the whole repo. So context engineering for coding agents, I believe it was. No, that's context engineering. There is.
You can definitely see the system prompt of Claude Code because under the hood, it's just making a network call. And you can just like proxy it, and then you can just see the prompt. You have it somewhere,
Here we
right?
go, traces. Yeah, here's the trace. So this is, you can literally just point Claude at a proxy and have it log everything out and then send this the request upstream to Anthropic. This is what lots of people doing. But like, yeah, here's our user message as you answer the user's questions. So you can kind of see all of this, and it says, here it is. Important, this context may or may not be relevant to your task. You should not respond to this context or otherwise consider it in your response unless it is highly relevant to your task. So every time you put something in Claude MD, it gets suffixed with this. Most of the time, it is not relevant.
So that means if you are trying to tell it to do something in Claude MD, like this is really important, my model might decide that it's not important because this is just part of the context window that the Claude agent does no matter what you do. And there's nothing you can do to edit this except have a proxy and remove that manually from the prompt in your proxy layer.
And this is the engineering part, right? This is about if you don't know exactly what's put in, if you don't know the tool descriptions, if you don't know kind of how Claude is being, so here's the raw body, but we can actually go get the JSON. So here's the system message. Here's the tool. So here's the task tool. People talk about subagents. Here's the prompt for the subagent. Launch a new agent that has access to all the tools when you're searching for a keyword that you're not confident. So this is like understanding how the task tool is exposed to Claude is really important for when you're prompting it. And so I don't say launch a subagent, I say launch a task because that's more likely to have the right effect. And when I tell it to launch a task, I tell it to put in the prompt how to prompt the agent because I want to get more clear, specific things out of that subagent. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I think that does, Dex. Richard asked a really interesting question about, hey, makes me think that an IDE had a window for deterministically managing context windows. That'd be super useful. I think today that would probably be true. I think tomorrow it won't matter. And the same realization I think is with Python. I think a lot of people used to say that in Python, if you're not garbage collecting automatically or at the right time and you can't manually control it, you can't write good code. Doesn't matter today. And I think as the models get better, like deterministically managing every single word matters less and less. If you're using a 1B model, it does matter. You do really need to manage every single word that goes in. But if you're not, it honestly, if you're using the latest models today, I suspect what you need, as a user need to do is just like manage the sections of context, not necessarily every single word to that degree. And there's probably some
Yep.
usefulness because even as an agent developer, like I have never actually read the research and I've never actually read the research prompts that Dexter gave me. I've never read the create plan prompts that Dexter gave me. I've never read any that he gave me, and they work. And the whole point here is that if they didn't work, I would go read the prompt. And you can think of it like how you would debug as an engineer. Like if something works, you don't really care what the API does under the hood. You don't care how much of a black box it is. Same with context journey. If thing is working, don't bother understanding it. The model's good enough, it's working. The
Yeah,
minute
have
it
you
stops
read
working, go figure out why.
yeah, I've never read the source code of the cat command, and I have
Yeah,
no reason to or desire to, because the API is clean and it always does what it says.
exactly. And I think that's really what context engineering is about, is like when we did performance engineering for the last 10 years, whenever I did that, every line of code that you write, I promise you there's some way to make it faster. Almost definitely. There's something you can do to make it faster. You don't need to. The value of performance engineering is not about making every line of code faster. It's actually about knowing what lines of code to spend your effort on so you can make that part of the system faster. Same with context engineering. Don't make every single system perfectly engineered. Focus on the parts of the system that actually need to be perfectly engineered. So in this workflow that we did today, Dexter really didn't have to optimize a lot of this stuff because like it works. It does the thing it wants. Doesn't matter how expensive it is. And most of the stuff that he's doing is allowed to be lossy.
It's allowed to be lossy, and it's the kind of thing that, like, without a lot of prompting, the model can still get it right.
Yeah, or at least 85% right. And for the task that you're doing, it doesn't matter if it's 100% right. It just needs to be directionally correct, like change logs or contact conversations. Like, here's the last thing you talked about with vibe off. Like, none of that stuff needs to be perfect or capture every single word of it.
Yeah, and the reason why it doesn't have to be perfect is, like, when I build this stuff, I work backwards from the workflows, which is like, what's the end goal? Is like, I want to send my team an update every week. I want to send my investors an update every month. I want to send a public update to our mailing list every month, and I want to send our, like, trusted testers good release notes that are high signal and high quality every morning, or every couple days, but mostly every morning because we're shipping too much to do 2 releases in a day.
Yeah. Um, we'll take a couple questions, and then I've got a flight to Amsterdam, so we're gonna probably cut it a little bit shorter than normal. If you guys haven't seen the code layer tool, Dexter will drop a link. It is the coolest thing that I have used for paralyzing how much code I can get done at any given time. I consider myself a pretty good engineer, but I realized that I was a novice before I used this thing, and now I use it, and I'm so much better than I used to be. And I think I aspire to be as good as
Oh,
Dexter.
thanks,
So
buddy.
check it out. If you're not using it, definitely check it out. Give Dexter some feedback.
Yep. There's a
Even
wait list
more.
there. I just put the link in. We'll put it in the show notes. You can go find it on GitHub and use the brew install command. I am asking early users to jump on the wait list so that I can watch you use it for the first time and get your feedback and get you added to some of our, like, private testing channels. That'll probably be true for another couple weeks as we iron out the last of the stability things and really pull in user feedback. So yes, technically you can go find it, but I would prefer to onboard you directly. And so we're gonna start letting people in off the wait list pretty soon. I can't stop you because it's free and open source forever, and you can just go find the release. But if you want to help out, you can join the wait list and you can get added to the group DMs with Vibov and some other cool people who are early testers.
And definitely just like if you really want to skip the list, just like add us a DM on Discord or something, and you'll get through much faster. And that'll be the easiest way.
Cool. Questions?
Would be that's would have same sense of any other question from anyone? It sounds like not too many. All
Do you
right.
think the
Um,
domain of tasks that can be achieved with this approach is going to keep growing? Will we hit some point where humans don't even determine the SOPs and communication strategies? What do you think?
um, my opinion is honestly, I think it's like software. Yes, like yes, Inevitably so, and not just because the models will get better. I think even if the models don't get better, like the agentic loops that we that we use to leverage the models will get better, and the tooling around them will get better. So like it's an inevitability. Like even if Python doesn't like change fundamentally architecturally, the libraries people build make it more usable every week, every day. When we built BAML, like part of BAML on day one was definitely worse, but like we just add more stuff into it so people can build more complicated things. Like that's just the way software works. So anything that is pure bits on a machine, generally bits moving around on a machine, generally gets better over time, and the capabilities extend over time as long as people give great feedback and leverage it further.
Richard, great question. Is project management software going away? Project management software is the only SaaS we still use every day.
That's funny.
That and Superhuman. So that's things like GitHub and Linear we still use because it provides a nice collaboration space and shared artifacts. It's a little bit harder to do with just like markdown files in GitHub when you want to have lots of comments and multiplayer and attach assets and things like that. Although Vibov, I don't know, I have to try your Obsidian workflow because if you could create a shared Obsidian space, maybe you can just drop everything in Markdown and it's not that much more efficient than having the model fetch the stuff, but like I don't
I
like
think
the linear MCP because it dumps a bunch of JSON into my context window. So we wrote a script that wraps it and pulls all the comments in one go.
Yeah, exactly. And that's again because the linear team doesn't understand context engineering, so they're doing dumb things with it, and they're just giving you stuff in a way that doesn't make sense that you know how to do better. So you're like, I can get way better juice if I don't use it directly. I also agree with like I think people always are like, oh, Claude Code is going to do everything. I actually think it's wrong. I think the best way to think about it is like we don't have one website to rule them all. We have a ton of different websites that we all go to that do slightly different things. And I don't see that ever really changing. We'll have different tools that we use all the time. Uh, Tools are just a natural way of humans interfacing data, and people have different patterns and different UXs they like. Um, yeah, Dexter's comment about what strategies you use to keep context from getting too big. Always be compacting, whether you're using slash compact in Claude Code, whether you're using manual compactions like what Dexter and I do with research and planning. The idea is you want to have some sort of state system that isn't the chat log itself. And you want to be able to review that, read that, understand that, which is why I personally have found Dexter's way of having a file as a source of truth that I can just go read at any point to be extremely powerful. Because whenever the agent does steer off, I can restart the context, feed in that file, and then boom, I'm done.
Yeah, I actually almost wrote always be clearing because clear is actually what we use. We don't use the slash compact. So when I say compact, it's little c compact, which is like find your own way to squeeze down the context into the things that are important to you, not, and whether the Cloud way works well for you, that's great. But what we have is kind of custom prompts that are like, cool, make a list of every file you touched and snippets of all the changes you made and what you were working on and what's currently broken and what are the next steps. And that works. Having that write that to a markdown file, then you can edit it, you can see it, you can control it, you can learn how to get better at that prompting, is a really powerful skill. And is, again, it's all about context engineering. How do you take a bunch of information and distill it down into fewer tokens that are just as valuable to the model?
You asked a question, what do you think about the role of MCP over time? I think we just stated it with Dexter being like the linear MCP does a dumb thing, so I just wrapped it and actually made it do the right thing. MCPs are just API calls. If the API caller knows what they're doing, API calls are great to use. If you're using it as a dumping ground to just have it do a lot of things, your agent probably won't work because 90% of the tools that people build probably are built incorrectly because most people are not on the bleeding edge of actually thinking about context engineering. And if you are, you're being held back. It's just where you think the median is versus where you are. And the median right now is pretty bad.
Oh,
Um,
let's make it better. I mean, that's why we're here,
yeah,
right?
that's why we're here. Yeah, we want to lift it up.
John says this is the kind of stuff people will sell courses on in 18 months. We should get a CC by NA so that people can't sell our shit.
That's right. I don't really care. I think the best kind of education is given out for free, and that's what all good content is.
Oh, yeah.
Why not take over the user's content completely by dynamically generating them before each agent execution? I think that's a thing that you can do, Slava, but really it goes down to, again, the same point, which is if you're going to go ahead and take over the user's context completely, you better hope that your users are real novices. Because for advanced users, they will not be okay with that. They'll be like Dexter and be like, this thing isn't working because I'm trying to have it do something much more complicated than what you planned to have it do. And
This
then
is
you're
Hamil
kind of
Hussein. This is show me the prompt.
exactly. It says it's show me the prompt. And the whole point is like by taking over the user's context completely, while you do lift the floor a little bit, the thing that you don't do is you actually bring down the ceiling a lot.
Yeah.
So it's the trade-off of what you're able to go build. And if you're okay bringing out the ceiling because the usability of what people want is very low, it's okay. That's totally useful. Generating release notes seems like one of those things where you can bring down the ceiling a lot and just make your user's life a lot better by bringing down the floor, bringing up the floor. But if it's something like generating arbitrary code in Claude Code, you probably don't want that. And Claude Code works best because Dexter can put in whatever he wants into the context window and have it do roughly the right thing.
Sick.
Let's take one or two more questions. Are those here in the, yeah, we'll push the code out soon. I think we should, do you want to push the research and prompts out too? Or we can do that in a different episode, actually. We should do that later. I think
Yeah,
those,
no, I mean, we should do another episode where you walk through your Obsidian flow, like really in practice, how does it work? How do people interact with it? What's your workflow? I think that'd be really interesting.
yeah, and we'll share the prompts out then once we tune them a little bit. And then let's just see if there's any more questions. Kyle, the GraphQL will never be the answer. It never was. It never will be. Good try though. And think I think that is it from questions.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you again next week. I will be in the middle of the day at Germany time, so we'll see how well that goes. But we'll have a fun time and we'll get a couple more bits of episode out and content out.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, bye, Bob.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Always good seeing you, Dex. All right.
Catch y'all
bye.
later.